3 Lives 3 Worlds. The Pillow Book. Upper Volume. Original work by Tangqi Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, rockharlequin, JoannaKuang. Chapter 2. When Tangqi was little, her parents had wanted to build a love nest for just themselves, so for a long stretch of time she was tossed over into the care of her aunt Bai Qian. Growing up with this aunt, she did everything from snaring birds in the sky to catching fish in the stream. Once, she even plucked all the feathers clean from her fourth uncle's Jingui bird while he was taking a nap. Taking into account her even wilder childhood days, Bai Qian turned a blind eye to Tangqi's mischiefs. However, her aunt Bai Qian did raise her with an understanding of the greater good. For example, Bai Qian once told Tangqi that the most important thing in being a deity was to not be afraid of losing face, because being shameless was also a sort of courage as it allowed one to bravely take that first step. No matter what, as long as she wasn't afraid of embarrassment and kept hanging on, she would succeed in the long run. Years later, Tangqi used this same logic to pass on to the little Do when she encouraged him to fight for the rights to his mother's bedchamber against his father. The most important thing in being an immortal is shamelessness. As long as you're shameless, anything can be done. At night, the little Do repeated these remarks word for word to Bai Qian, asking his mother what it meant exactly to be shameless as well as how to be thick-faced like his father. Bai Qian placed down the bowl of lotus soup she was going to bring to Yehua as a late-night snack, then went to the study within Zhongsheng Palace and picked out a few bundles of thick Buddhist sutras. She packed them to the rim in a wooden cart, and taking advantage of the late hours, sent them over to Tangqi's place. She idly added an instruction to her dear niece that if she didn't finish copying everything by the next sundown, a series of blind dates would be waiting for her from sunrise to sunset. Tangqi was already drifting to dreamland when she was woken up by Bai Qian's maid, Nana. As her eyes fluttered open, she saw the heaps of sutras stacked high in front of her. She remembered she had said some nonsense to the Do in the morning, and now cried a river of tears in remorse. The next day, not being able to finish copying all of the scriptures, Tangqi was carried to the Moonlight Garden on the 32nd level of heaven. The Moonlight Garden was covered with carefree trees. Amid the tall canopies were countless extraordinary flowers. This was where Daodi Tianzun of Taking taught his students. Every young male immortal was gathered at this party. Tangqi swept her eyes and estimated that there were about 100 people present. Some were in conversations with their colleagues, some were anxiously gazing to the garden entrance. It would be all right if it was only a couple of people, or even 4 or 5, but Tangqi was overwhelmed seeing dozens of them like this. She was audacious, but even then she took one startled step back, and another, and another. From nearby, Bai Qian's voice rose to tell the attendant next to her, I think we should just tie her up. She must attend this party no matter what. We mustn't let her escape halfway. Tangqi's heart churned and she immediately turned and ran. She leapt her way out of there. The maid followed her closely behind, matching her steps wit for wit and courage for courage. Tangqi didn't know when she started to lose them either. She could only tell by the time she passed the dense foliage of the sal trees, when the branches shook and pale yellow petals fell on her hair. Behind her, the sound of chasing wind had stopped. She heaved and looked back. There really wasn't anyone. There was only the silver river running afar, with the sunset's rosy light faintly reflected on its shimmering water. Careless talk leads to trouble. Her mouth had gotten her into trouble and she had had to transcribe Buddhist scriptures all day long. At present, with 2 sal trees right in front of her eyes, her brain was filled with the long Agama. What was written in it again? At that time, the venerated Buddha reached parinirvana under the 2 sal trees within the garden in Kushan Agar. Those sorts of words. Tangqi brushed the petals from her hair and sighed as she walked. It wasn't a waste after all if she was able to remember such difficult passages. She looked around and realized how dirty and tired she was after the chase. She wondered if she should undress and take a dip under the Wangtian spring behind these sal trees. She contemplated for a long while. The moon was finally rising from the east, and although it hadn't risen very high, and wasn't as romantic as would be seen by mortals gazing at it from afar, the cold silver moonlight managed to feebly spread over the rocks and flowers nearby. A few steps away, a thin fog shrouded over the azure water, diffusing a warm mystical energy. Tangqi looked around. It was past the dog hour, past 9 p.m., and assumedly no one would come at this time. She took off her coat, then her tunic, then her undergarment, and stepped into the clear water. She lowered herself and found that the hot water came up to her neck. Only now did Tangqi let out a comfortable sigh. She looked at her palm and saw that many sal petals had drifted in with the wind. She gathered them up and began to string them into a strand. Suddenly, she heard rustling sounds behind the large boulder. Tangqi's petal-gathering hands froze mid-air. A slight ripple moved across the clear water surface, breaking the reflection of the moon. A figure in white emerged from behind the boulder in the middle of the spring. Tangqi ceased her breathing as she saw that figure wading the water and increasingly nearing closer. At last a tall person emerged from the mist, with long silver hair and a handsome countenance. Tangqi leaned against the rock wall. Even though she had always been thick-faced, this was definitely an embarrassing situation. Her face blanched white. But being King Kaihu's queen, she quickly regained composure and considered saying hello to him. But how to say hellos in this situation was also an art in itself. Had she been here to look at the flowers, she could have asked him, "What great weather we have today. Is your Majesty also here to enjoy the flowers?" But how could she raise her naked arm up to ask him, "What great weather we have today. Is your Majesty also here to take a bath?" While Tangqi miserably pondered over what to say, Dong Hua leisurely walked to the other side of the bank without bothering to glance once at her. Tangqi thought to herself that perhaps Daijun didn't see her. Then she hadn't really lost face in front of him, had she? She was about to heave in secret relief when Dong Hua Daijun had stopped short of going back on shore and in an instant, slid his cloak over her body. At that exact moment, Tangqi heard someone's voice from nearby. It sounded like Lord Liansong, who was awkwardly laughing. "Dear me, I'm so sorry. I saw nothing, nothing at all. I'm leaving now." She numbly ripped Dong Hua's white cloak from her head. Her gaze went to the far distance where the carefree branches slightly shook under the moonlight. Dong Hua in only his inner tunic stood on shore looking at her for a length of time. At long last, he asked, "What are you doing here?" "Bathing," Tangqi honestly answered him. Her face flushed pink from the water steam. She suddenly remembered although the spring water here was blue in color, it was so clear one could see down to its stream bed. Her face grew red. Within seconds she looked as if she was steeped in boiling water. You, close your eyes. You can't look this way. No, turn elsewhere quickly. Dong Hua unhurriedly looked at her from head to toe and finally, with great forbearance, turned to face another direction. Fengju frantically looked at the heap of clothes on the shore. She didn't think she'd be in this situation when she took them off. Even her undergarment was so far away that if she wanted to pick it up, half her body would need to leave the water in order to retrieve it. She was so befuddled she forgot that she was actually a fox. She needed only to shape-shift back into her original form and Dong Hua wouldn't be able to see a thing. While she was still troubled, long slender fingers had brought her white skirt before her eyes. Dong Hua at this point still had his face turned. His long-lashed eyes were still sealed. She was about to grab her skirt when she asked in horror, "How did you know I wanted my clothes?" Normally, in order to keep up with the image of King Kaihu's queen, she always pretended to be generous and wise. Now she was showing her childishness like a lively young goddess. Dong Hua paused and was going to withdraw his hand. Despite her fussy words, she immediately snatched her skirt at the speed of light. She quickly covered the sensitive areas on her body and came ashore to dress herself. Too embarrassed to bid goodbye, she quickly fled the scene. Dong Hua called her back. "Hey, you forgot something." She couldn't help but to look back, and saw Dong Hua bending down to pick up something. When she realized what it was, all the blood in her body had rushed to her head. The thing Dong Hua was picking up was an undergarment. A lotus-pink undergarment. Her undergarment. Dong Hua's shirt was gaping slightly, exposing part of his collarbone. With an unchanging expression, he casually handed her the undershirt. Fengju didn't even know whether to receive it or not, feeling the whole world tumbling down. While they remained in a deadlock, the adjacent tree rustled and out came the elegant figure of Lian Song. I forgot my fan. I came back to retrieve it but it looks like I'm interrupting you too. I'll come by to apologize another day. You guys, please do continue." Fengju wanted to cry so very badly. She quickly grabbed her undershirt and leapt over the wall. A breeze picked up the sal petals and swirled them in the air. Lian Song faintly smiled and looked toward Dong Hua. "Aren't you going to run after her?" Then with a twinkle in his eyes, he asked, "The beauty you met by Chengtian Terrace the other day was Fengju of King Kaihu? But shouldn't you know? If you want to make her your queen, in the future you'll have to call that brat Yehua your uncle." Dong Hua stared at his robe and unhurriedly answered, "Some days ago I heard a rumor that you have fallen for Cheng Yu Yuan Jun." Lian Song closed the fan in his hand. "Hey," Dong Hua continued, "I'm thinking about making her my goddaughter. What do you think?" Lian Song, become speechless. Fengju wasn't one to mull over the minor details in life. But what had happened wasn't minor at all. Who could tell what was going to be its consequences? After losing her dignity in front of Dong Hua, Fengju couldn't bear to show her face elsewhere. She hid away for 2 days straight inside the little Do's Qingyun Palace, hoping someone would offer a kind consolation. Anyone but her Aunt Bai Qian. But it'd been so long yet no one came to clear the blockage in her mind. Fengju finally approached the doe. If you once liked a girl, and after many years you see her again, looking for an appropriate example, she at length asked, and she finds out you're still wearing diapers, what would you do? The little doe stared at her and refuted, I haven't worn diapers in a long time. I only said if. If, Fengju quickly placated him. The doe thought a while, his small face blushing red. Embarrassed, he turned away and said in discomfort, then that really is embarrassing. Only you're dropping your undergarment when you see your crush again could really compare to something as embarrassing as that. Still uncomfortable, the doe said, if that's the case, I'd rather ram my head into tofu and kill myself. At first, Fengju had started to cheer up. But after hearing the little doe's words, she was depressed for several days more. By the end of the fourth day, Bai Qian sent a maid over with a message that the singers and dancers from Chengtian Terrace had recovered and would put together a play at Hebai Yuan, asking for her to come and watch. At this time, Fengju put aside her sorrow and finally left Qingyun Palace. On the stage within Hebai Garden was a herd of female generals in gaudy garments singing noisy lines. Bai Qian with a white silk fan sidled near Fengju and said, Heaven is kicking up a fuss in recent days over some interesting rumors. Have you heard any of them? She coughed. That is, of course, I'm not too keen on gossips. With utter discernment, Fengju replied, of course you're not anxious over these things. I'm not either. But please, go ahead. Bai Qian nodded and unhurriedly went on. That's right, neither of us like minding other people's business, so you must not have thought of this either. The Donghua Daijun whom we all thought was an honorable man, we have indeed been fooled. It's a good thing you broke off your fate with him 300 years ago. It was fortunate heaven had helped you cut this tie clean. Fengju lifted her head attentively. They say he is hiding a remarkable beauty inside Taichan Palace, and that he's completely taken with her, Bai Qian said as she peeled a walnut. Fengju placed her teacup down and lowered her eyes. Then, this must be why His Majesty hadn't left Taichan Palace for so many years. She lightly laughed. Of course, if next to him is a beautiful girl, he would never feel lonely without ever leaving home. Bai Qian handed her a peeled walnut. You need not pay too much attention. You two have nothing to do with each other anymore. I'm not telling you this to upset you. Fengju picked up her teacup again and asked, who could this beauty be whom Daijun adores so much? I asked Siming once, not that I wanted to. I don't really care about this matter that much. But Siming didn't know a thing either. After this secret spread, everyone started to guess at who the mysterious fairy is. But Donghua hadn't opened his mouth once regarding this. That's why they can't come up with any name besides his foster sister Zhihe. But in my opinion, Zhihe has been staying in the mortal realm all these years. I wouldn't think she's the one. Fengju held her teacup and listened intently. Bai Qian took another sip and continued. As for the beauty, she does indeed exist. I heard Donghua had left Taichan Palace and gone to the hot spring with her last week. They were caught by Lord Liansong, which is why such rumors are now leaking. Fengju fell over and crashed on the ground. The hot spring? She asked as she supported her hand on the chair. Bai Qian looked down at her in surprise and continued, Are you surprised, too? I was shocked. This rumor has only spread a few days ago, but upon careful analysis, I think it's rather trustworthy. Do you know Cheng Yu Yuanjun whom Lord Lianzong is in love with? Before I returned, it was Cheng Yu who took care of the little doe. I heard Cheng Yu was actually the illegitimate daughter sired by Dong Hua and this fairy. In the middle of climbing up, Fengju fell to the ground once more. Fengju knew well what her position was. She was a widow. There was a famous mortal saying, "Scandals are aplenty in front of a widow's home." Fengju suddenly realized it wasn't because she was a proper widow that no scandal happened during her 300 years of widowhood. It was in fact because King Kaihu was a quiet place. On the other hand, she had only arrived on Zhukongtian for a few days and already rumors were flying off the roof. But to hear such rumors now had made her somewhat worried. She felt she hadn't done her job of living a widow's life if she was caught in this scandal. Even 300 years ago, she wouldn't be happy to be associated with Dong Hua in such gossips. Fengju excelled at one thing not even her Aunt Bai Qian was good at. When came across a perplexing matter, Bai Qian would never be able to put it out of her mind. But Fengju wasn't like that. She dealt with things only as her ability allowed her to. In her opinion, her best trait wasn't cooking. Siming once praised her for being dogged in her efforts but also resolute once she decided to let go. She believed her behaviors had been worthy of his praise. Previously, she hadn't prepared well, later she came to remember an adage she had invented. After living for 30,000 years, she had built up a substantial collection of proverbs from experience. She had to dig from her memory for the longest time before she remembered it. One should never be attached to a man who is attached to other women, no matter how great a man he is. Even less so should one attach oneself to a man who is attached to other men. She once lived and died for him, yet he had never paid any attention to her. He might even have loved someone else instead. She lowered her own status to become a maid, spent centuries sweeping and dusting around his palace. She wasn't even qualified to speak to him. This whole matter she could pretend it never existed. Naturally she should avoid whatever that could be avoided. Recognizing this, she made sure to maintain a certain distance from him. But for some reason, that distance was closing on itself more and more. She thought for a long time and decided she needed to put more effort into staying away from him from now on. But just as she came to this decision, she discovered that the citron bracelet she had always worn on her wrist, which was gifted by King T, had disappeared. It was a very important bracelet. She carefully recalled past events and figured she must have lost it behind Dong Hua's Taichan palace that night. Before they maintain a greater distance, she had to come see him for one last time. But this was truly a stormy business. She must be absolutely careful, lest she ends up alarming the people by his side. How complicated! Fengju evaluated the situation and remembered that the 5th of May was just around the corner. Although Dong Hua was living in seclusion on the 13th celestial sky, he still had responsibilities he hadn't relinquished to Tianjun yet, such as keeping the immortal records. There was a saying, "Wear green skirt, come to heaven's gates, give thanks to heaven and earth, pay homage to Dongjun." Every year when mortals ascended heaven as newly minted fairies, they would need to make a stop at Qing Yun Hall, and Dong Hua would be the one to award them with an appropriate title. As had always been the practice, Dong Hua Daijun would stay behind to check the recordings in the Liangzhen mirror hung in Qingyun Hall when everyone took leave toward the end. Fengju surmised that there was no better opportunity to come see him than at that exact time. On the 5th day of May, Luan birds filled the air with their songs and mandarava flowers blossomed in the rain. Fengju had planned to camp outside of Qingyun Hall since earlier, but the little doe had hung onto her for an entire morning. The easily abandoned doe was getting smarter and smarter these days. When she finally arrived on the 36th sky, she could hear no sound indicating a ceremony was in conduct. Fengju thought that court must have been dismissed. Pretending to be dabbing her sweat, she covered half of her face with a handkerchief and asked the immortal standing guard at the doors, "His Majesty, is he inside by himself?" The guard was a stammering man, but he was a responsible stammering man. He blocked the entrance and asked her, "Dare I ask for your name?" Fengju pulled her kerchief over her entire face this time, leaving only her chin, and replied, "Bai Qian of King Kaiu." The guard bowed respectfully and said, "Your Highness, His Majesty is indeed inside by himself." Fengju sighed in relief and thanked him while saying, "I need to talk to him in private, so please don't let anyone else come in. I'll thank you generously after this." Then she proceeded into the gate. The guard didn't dare to stop her, but he wasn't ecstatic in letting her through either. He scratched his head in frustration. "Are you that happy to see me?" Fengju asked as she turned around. After some moments of thoughts, she added, "Should I sign an autograph for you?" The guard shook his head rapidly and said, "His Majesty, by himself, inside." Fengju nodded in comprehension after a moment of silence. "Has he been waiting for some time? How considerate of you. I'll enter, then." And she hurriedly stepped in. When Fengju's back disappeared in the distance, the guard finally spoke the words which got stuck in his throat, "By himself, inside, heading a meeting with everyone, cannot be disturbed." Qingyun Hall on the 36th level of heaven was the only place on Zhukongtian surrounded by cerulean clouds. Built with tourmaline beams and amethyst walls, it had always been an ornate and magnificent building. But its polished exterior was by no means its brilliance. Its true virtue was its soundproof quality. Fengju, however, wasn't aware of this. She listened for a while, and after not hearing a sound, decided Dong Hua must indeed be alone inside. Fengju was taught personally by Bai Zhen since a young age that if she wanted to collect debts, she should start by exchanging pleasantries. But in case this failed, she should concentrate on simply 3 words: quick, accurate, and relentless. The bracelet was surely lost behind Dong Hua Daijun's home, but she couldn't disregard the chance that he would refute her claim. Hence, if she wanted it back, she would have to cram her facts into his head and make him confess at the outset. Fengju recited the 3 words quick, accurate, and relentless again, inhaled quickly and raised her leg to kick open the hall's doors. When her leg had stretched out halfway, she suddenly changed her mind. She stepped back and used her hand instead. Her voice became the only sound within the hall, loud and clear. "The other night I lost my citron bracelet. Might it be with your mages?" Her words abruptly froze on her tongue. There were people in Qingyun Hall. Not just people, but a horde of them. Fengju numbly stared at the two long lines of bowed courtiers. They were wearing scholar robes. It was obvious they were in the middle of being granted various celestial titles. Underneath the imperial seat was a kneeling fairy. In his hand was a bamboo tablet. He had only come before Donghua to recite his various merits. At this point everyone had collected himself and looked back at Fengju with fear at her audacious words. The only person who showed no emotion was the same one sitting high on the golden throne. Donghua propped his arms on the armrest with disinterest. He gazed down at her from high above. Fengju was startled for a moment. She pushed the hall's doors and struggled to say with calm, "Pardon me. Sleepwalking, careless, got lost." Donghua's voice came to her at an unhurried pace. "That bracelet was indeed left at my place." Fengju tripped over the doorstep. Donghua deliberately took from his sleeve a delicate and exquisite white jade hairpin and casually said, "You forgot your hairpin too." Someone in the hall swallowed nervously. Fengju dropped to the floor and played dead. The entire hall was drowned in silence. Donghua's voice rang out again, utterly calm and slow. "And here's the flower pin you dropped at the hot spring." He paused, then with natural aplomb, said, "Come and take them." Fengju covered her face and dragged herself up from the door. Horrified, she replied, "I'm really sleepwalking, really came to the wrong place." Donghua propped his cheek and said, "There's also," while looking as if he was about to take something out. Fengju stopped her cries and immediately put away her miserable face in exchange for a serious one. "Oh, look, I'm suddenly awake. My mind is completely clear now." Perhaps due to the profound aura here, she then added as if she had only realized such truth. She came forward and bowed ceremoniously. "Indeed, I had come to retrieve some things from you. I didn't go to the wrong place. I apologize for inconveniencing you with keeping them." She was embarrassed and bashful at the same time. "How reckless of me to have disturbed everyone. I'm so very sorry. I will make amends another day." She did each of her actions so fluidly that she herself couldn't help but be surprised. Donghua still gave away no reaction. Everyone else followed suit and kept still. Fengju gritted her teeth and stepped onto the royal platform. Donghua gazed up to see her distressed look. His eyes flickered with a faint smile, which disappeared just as quickly as it had come. Donghua offered his right hand. In it were a citron bracelet, a white jade hairpin, and a white flower pin. Fengju was somewhat confused. Donghua unhurriedly said, "Why aren't you taking them? Or are you waiting for me to personally hand them to you?" Fengju hurried to take them, and with false regard as if she was receiving an important edict. Afterward, she even remembered to exit in the same respectful bowing position. When she got to the doors, all the embarrassment shot to her face as she immediately sprinted away. Everyone in Qingyun Hall remained standing in utter solemnity. The immortal kneeling on the ground was still dazedly staring after Fengju's distant shadow. Fortunately, Donghua's elderly steward wasn't distracted by Fengju. Trying to help the kneeling youth, he asked, "You were telling us about your battle against the sea dragon 500 years ago. When the princess of the Zhongrong kingdom whom you rescued insisted on marrying you, you declined her offer." He leaned forward excitedly and asked, "And then what?" Donghua cast him a glance and he wisely cleared his throat and tempered his voice. "What? happened after that? Please continue your report. That night after court was dismissed at Qingyun Hall, as had always been the tradition, Tianjun ordered for a celebratory banquet in the Moonlight Garden. The young fairies who came to heaven for the first time naturally felt amazed at everything they saw. Under a carefree canopy yet to flower, a clever-looking fairy whispered to another, "You've seen so many heavenly immortals today, but have you seen either one from the Qingkai kingdom?" Then he added in a secretive tone, "I heard in attendance tonight will be the lady and her niece Fengju. I heard the both of them are renowned beauties. So beautiful are they that even the fairies in heaven pale in comparison." The young fairy who was spoken to was the very same one who knelt on the ground this morning. After his merits were listed, he was appointed to the Genren rank. Using his mortal surname, he was now called Chen Genren. Chen Genren's face turned crimson red as he replied inapplicably, "The fairy, who burst into Qingyun Hall this morning, will she be there too?" The other fairy covered his mouth in surprise and whispered back, "I've asked around, and it seems likely she is Daijun's foster sister, Princess Jihe." Judging from this morning, Daijun's feelings for his foster sister aren't of the ordinary kind. He then exclaimed, "My, she's quite lovely. Quite lovely indeed. Even I who usually do not give into mortal lust had to gaze at her in awe." "You were stunned, of course, but," he slapped Chen Genren's shoulder, "you and I are humans who gained immortality. According to the rules, even if Daijun didn't have any feelings for his sister, we can only admire her from far away." Chen Genren dropped his head in bleakness. The Moonlight Garden on the 32nd sky hung higher than the moon itself. For that reason, moonbeams did not reach the garden. Instead, the entire place was illuminated as bright as day by hanging night pearls on the carefree trees. Zhukongtian had a bad common practice. The highly ranked deities always came to these parties exactly on time, as if to say they were swamped with work and could not get away any sooner. Fortunately Donghua and Liansong weren't part of this group. They were always either very early or very late, or they didn't show up at all. They were never on time. This time these two graced everyone with their presence even though there was still ample time left. The young maids had arranged a table for them behind a dense tree so as to not let the others feel uncomfortable with their grand presence. When Chen Genren and the other fairy were talking, they had been standing near this tree. Each of their words had been heard by the two deities sitting behind it. At this time, Donghua was disassembling the Haoshan Tower which Liansong had just given him. The Haoshan Tower was a magical weapon that could vanquish any demon and ghoul. Liansong brought it to Donghua so they could tweak it into a weapon which could subdue even the gods. His goal was to have it ranked first in the magical weapon record, pushing Moi Wan's newly developed Julahu down a notch. Lord Liansong placed his fan away and poured some wine for the both of them. With a smile, he said, "I heard you teased Fengju in front of everyone in Qingyun Hall earlier. Why don't you sit down and tell me why your loyal steward Zonglin had to run to me for advice on protecting your honor?" Donghua gazed at the tower in his hand and said, "Asking advice from you? Was he still sleepy? I'm not going to trade words with you." When he finished a cup of wine, he suddenly recalled something. "There's something important I need to tell you. I forgot about it when we went off topic." He tapped his fan onto the nearby wine cup and continued. "There seems to be some movement in the south by the demon clan. Dong Hua kept his eyes on the newly disassembled Haoshan Tower and asked, "What happened?" Lian Song leaned back against his chair. His eyes twinkled as he slowly replied, "Who else but one of the 7 demon lords, Yan Chaiwu? Do you still remember him? The one who came to duel with you because of your betrothal to the demon clan's eldest princess." Still with nonchalance, he continued, "He used the soul-locking jade to trap you into the wicked lotus sphere, making you suffer and lose your face for a while there. Remember that too." With more delight, he went on, "If a baby fox hadn't appeared out of nowhere to help you, you might have lost half of your lifetime's power." Then he summed it all up with a sense of regret. "Of course you finally broke out of the trap and gave Yan Chaiwu such a brutal lesson even his parents couldn't recognize him. But he's still one of the 7 demon lords. Such disgrace was too much for him to bear. He now wants to have a rematch so he can wipe away the old humiliation." Dong Hua's eyes moved slightly as he blankly said, "I'm waiting for his invitation." "I thought you have long retired from worldly concerns," Lian Song said in surprise. "Or do you still think he kidnapped your baby fox?" He frowned. "Didn't you personally make a trip to the demon clan 300 years ago and verified yourself that the baby fox wasn't there?" Sighing, he said, "Speaking of which, this world is so big, can't you just get another fox?" A moment passed when he asked in recognition, "Isn't Fengju of King Kaihu also a red fox?" "Well, she's a 9-tailed red fox, but a red fox nonetheless." "Don't tell me for this reason, you're—" Dong Hua leaned his cheek on his hand and looked past the dense foliage. "They're 2 entirely different matters." His eyes incidentally paused on a scowling Fengju who was now following Bai Qian into the garden. She wore a white dress, her hair adorned with a white flower pin. Her expression was icy cold. When she didn't talk, she looked rather nice and proper. Bai Qian had bad eyesight but Fengju's was excellent. With one glance she could tell Dong Hua was leaning against his chair looking at her from behind the verdure. Fengju retreated and held onto Bai Qian's arm to plead. "Being a widow, I think it's best to adhere to propriety and not bring myself into the spotlight." Bai Qian quickly cut her short. "So you think coming to a dinner with your aunt isn't as proper as helping Jian tame the Xian beast for 4th brother to make into a new riding animal? If that's the case—" Fengju trembled and took hold of Bai Qian's hand more tightly. "Luckily regulations for widows aren't that strict. It's good to come out every now and then," she stammered for a while and lied, "it's good for one's health and mind." Bai Qian smiled brightly and nodded, "You're exactly right." The 2 royal ladies of King Kaihu stepped into the garden with dignity, one after the other. The new immortals turned to look at them in fascination. Fortunately the banquet attendants were used to seeing these 2 beauties and quickly led them to their seats. Behind the carefree tree, Lian Song tapped his fan onto the stone table and said to Dong Hua, "What are your true intentions toward her? Do you only feel she's pretty, or—" Dong Hua stopped looking. A smile appeared in his eyes, and just as quickly went away. "She's indeed very interesting." Lian Song used the aptitude of a renowned lady killer to interpret his words, but after half a day, still couldn't fully understand. Interesting meaning. At this very moment, an official by the throne above announced, "His Majesty the Lord of Heaven has arrived." Lian Song sighed and stood up, telling Dong Hua, "Put the Haoshan Tower away." Tonight's banquet at the Moonlight Garden was an intimate dinner. It was an intimate dinner, but it was not comfortable in the least. As time passed, each Tianjun ascended the throne and descended it. Only Donghua Daijun sat firmly and unchangingly on the Daoist Trinity Holy Land. Over the years there had been a few times when even Tianjun was made the topic of conversations over drinks, but none of it had ever involved Donghua. This was the first time there was a rumor about him. It flew straight from the first sky to the 36th sky into Tianjun's ears like a shooting star. The first victim was of course Donghua. The other, because everyone lacked imagination, was poor innocent Princess Zhihe. But whatever Zhihe was thinking, she never refuted each time someone came to ask her, replying instead with only a silent smile. The incumbent Tianjun had a habit of overestimating himself. He thought he was a sovereign who understood his people well. The well-known story was that Donghua was in love with Princess Zhihe. Because she was also a heavenly deity, Tianjun thought it was time to bring Zhihe back, as a favor to Donghua. When he made up his mind, he decided it should be announced at this semi-intimate, semi-formal party while Zhihe hadn't yet left. But he must send down his decree in a natural way such that no one would suspect of his favoritism toward Donghua, and at the same time revealing the fact that Donghua would now owe him a favor. Having heard that Zhihe was a talented dancer, he finally decided to order 18 fairies to dance in the background for Zhihe's favorite Crane on Heaven dance. Being a smart girl, Zhihe did not disappoint and danced Crane on Heaven as if it was Phoenix on Heaven. Additionally, there wasn't just one phoenix, there was a whole flock of them, flying straight to the 9th layer of clouds. Everyone from below the stage was mesmerized with wide-eye wonder. When the dance came to its end, Tianjun led with a few claps, and immediately thunderous sounds of applause followed. Tianjun looked to the stage and asked, despite already knowing the answer, was that the dancing fairy Princess Zhihe who was sent to Mount Kailan 300 years ago? Everyone naturally concurred. Tianjun looked to be in thoughts as he said, "I can't believe a banished fairy could be so talented. I deem 300 years of penitence in the mortal realm have been enough. She may return to Zhukongtian tomorrow." Then he looked to Donghua and said, "Lord Donghua, what do you think? What a well-staged play." Standing on stage, Princess Zhihe's skirt fabric fluttered like a dreamlike illusion as she also silently looked to her foster brother. Donghua was again playing with the Haoshan Tower. Upon hearing this, he briefly glanced at her and nodded. "Sounds good." At that exact moment a cracking sound came from the diagonal side of the garden. By the time they looked over, Fengju's porcelain teacup was already lying on the tabletop in 4 pieces. Donghua was caught astounded. Liansong hid behind his fan and prodded his chin. "Did you see? She crushed the cup with just one hand. That's scary good." Fengju was sure the moment Donghua said, "Sounds good," Zhihe's lips had smirked into a provoking smile as she faced her. She still remembered her father Bai Yi's teaching, "Although you are young, remember your station and responsibilities. Don't fight with the others or let them turn you into a joke. It's all right to disgrace yourself, but never let your position be dishonored." She had kept these words close to her heart for 300 years. Even on the rare occasion that someone should offend her, she really did train herself to have a generous mind. But as she faced Zhihe this time, these everyday courtesies could die for all she cared. This little princess from Taichan Palace had really wronged her, carving a scar in her heart. This old story dated back to more than 2,000 years ago. She was but an ignorant kid at the time. She had gone alone to Mount Qingyao in the southern land and thoughtlessly provoked a tiger demon. It was about to devour her when Donghua Daijun passed by and saved her life. She devoted herself to Donghua from that moment on. To repay his kindness, she ended up owing Siming another. She snuck into Taichan Palace on the 13th sky and became a maidservant there. She tried her best but she did not have much luck. Moreover, Donghua's foster sister, Princess Zhihe, had laid all sorts of obstacles to make things difficult for her. Donghua didn't pay much attention to his domestic affairs. He did not have a queen either, so everything within the palace was overseen by Zhihe. Fengju's days went on with hardship. Later, Donghua somehow got tricked into the wicked lotus sphere, granting her at last a fated chance. From a very young age, she had always been as determined as a boy. To save Donghua from danger, she didn't think twice about trading her appearance, her voice, and her precious 9 tails to turn into a baby fox. Well, she might have had an ulterior motive. She thought that as with the love she had given him in return for his kindness, he might love her back in return for her kindness. After 2,000 years of hard work, she was finally reaping some reward. But life was always unpredictable. After her wounds got better, Donghua implicitly allowed her to stay by his side day and night to keep him company. She really felt those were some of her happiest days. Although as a red baby fox she had lost all magical abilities, she was still utterly satisfied. She was happy even in her dreams. That night she had a good sleep. In the morning she was woken up by foraging birds pecking on her windows. On her pillow was Donghua's handwriting. He wrote that if she woke up, she should come by the atrium so he could feed her good food. She happily jumped out of bed and skipped all the way to the atrium, shaking the only tail she had left. When she got there, she was surprised to find Zhihe in front of the flower beds crying as she argued with Donghua over something. She didn't think it was the right moment to come over, so she quietly hid away behind a jujube tree nearby. Because she was well raised, she didn't want to eavesdrop on their conversation. She lowered her head and covered her sharp ears with her paws. They continued to argue for a long time. Most of what was said was from Zhihe. Her cries made Fengju uncomfortable. Their conversation was finally coming to an end. She slowly lowered her paws down when she suddenly heard Donghua spoke in a low voice. "I promised foster father I'd look after you, so I will never abandon you. Why do you have to be jealous of a pet?" Long after Donghua left, she crawled out from behind the jujube tree. Zhihe smilingly said to her, "You see, you are but a pet, so how can you dream of having my foster brother? Don't you think it's rather laughable?" She was a little hurt, but she kept strong. To have to personally hear Donghua say such things was indeed hurtful, but he was only speaking the truth. To pursue Donghua this way really wasn't the best approach. She herself had wanted more. But this was only the beginning. They say when it rains it pours. A string of memories she never wanted to remember flooded back and woke her up from her beautiful dream. One after another, each was excruciatingly painful. She had been braver than her peers of the same age, but she was still after all a baby. With all the hard times and grievances, eventually she became disheartened. Jihe won emphatically this round of psychological warfare. She hadn't cared that she had lost to Jihe, she was only sad she couldn't make Donghua like her. But she had no idea why Jihe disliked her so much. Even when she had decided to leave Zhukongtian, she still made life hard for her. On the night she was leaving Zhukongtian, Jihe in a red bridal gown came to her. Pretending to be kind, she gently petted her head and said, "I've been with foster brother for 90,000 years. He was the one who raised me since the day I was born, and today I am finally going to marry him. I'm very happy. You're a kind little fox, are you happy for me too?" Then with a faint smile, she taunted, "What, are you not? But of course, you've never been." Fengju still remembered how bright and full the moon was that night. Stepping on its reflection made her feel as though she was dragging her feet through the river of fate. That river was deep and round, as though it had wanted to drown her. Old memories came back like ephemeral fog. Fengju glanced to the stage where Jihe had just completed her dance. 300 years were still too short. Her old acquaintance hadn't changed. In those days, despite Jihe's bullying, she remained stubborn about Donghua. She stupidly viewed those insults as her trials from heaven, and Jihe was heaven's instrument to test her. After leaving Zhukongtian and becoming somewhat sober, she finally realized Jihe was simply her arch-rival. For centuries she had let herself bullied for no reason. But if she were to especially race back to Zhukongtian only to return these pain and grievances, it would be quite petty. How could she avenge herself while appearing magnanimous? She thought long and careful, but after not finding a satisfactory solution, she was going to quit altogether. But it was as if heaven understood her 300-year grudge and especially arranged today for her. So how could she disappoint heaven's goodwill, especially when her opponent was smiling so provocatively? If she didn't make things a little difficult for her, she would be doing her pretty smile a disservice. When the young maid brought to her another cup, Jihe's sneering smile seemed to intensify. She looked pleased with herself as the aggravating beams pooled in the corners of her eyes. Fengju received the new cup. Seeing Jihe's increased provocation, her mouth also curved back into a smile. Next to her, Auntie Bai Qian glanced to Jihe then glanced back at her. She scolded softly, "Tianjun is discussing official matters with his subjects. You are now the queen of King Kaiyu. You have the fortune to witness his supremacy and listen to his teachings, yet how can you not only be inattentive, but even smiley at his words?" It sounded as though her aunt was scolding her, but this duet the two of them sang to fool her rigid father wasn't something that could be practiced in a century or two. In a split second, Fengju had caught on. She placed her hands together respectfully. "I wouldn't dare. I was only thinking, when a King Kaiyu's subject is cast out, he would have to accomplish numerous feats to be reinstated back to the ranks of the immortals. Recently, uncle-in-law mentioned unrest in the southern lands. I've always thought Princess Jihe as a water god would be sent to battle. I was worried she would be sent to the lands in the south and only allowed back to Zhukongtian after clinching victory. But that was indeed too severe of a punishment. Dancing one dance was much better, was it not? I thought my worries had been for naught, so I smiled in relief at first. Afterwards, I realized how just and benevolent heaven's laws are, which was why I smiled again in veneration. But then I thought that fortunately Princess Jihe can be forgiven due to her talents, but how will a talentless fairy ever make up for her misdeed should she commit one? For this reason, I smiled again in puzzlement. The deities who were present could all hear from her words that this King Kaihu monarch was casting aside their lord's face. She was deliberately refuting his words, yet her remarks had been utterly sincere, utterly modest, and utterly polite. Graciously, Fengju placed her hands together and faced the deities. I come from a rustic land, so I'm not very knowledgeable. How embarrassing I've made myself in front of everyone. She sat back down, and from a distance made the same gesture to Tianjun. Lian Song nudged Dong Hua with his fan and said, "She's quite your peer in spewing bitter words. My father must be having a headache right now." Dong Hua turned the teacup inside his palm and looked toward Fengju's pretense. "How can that be? I'm much more succinct than she is. You are now the queen of King Kaihu. You have the fortune to witness his supremacy and listen to his teachings, yet how can you not only be inattentive, but even smiley at his words?" It sounded as though her aunt was scolding her, but this duet the two of them sang to fool her rigid father wasn't something that could be practiced in a century or two. In a split second, Fengju had caught on. She placed her hands together respectfully. "I wouldn't dare. I was only thinking, when a King Kaihu's subject is cast out, he would have to accomplish numerous feats to be reinstated back to the ranks of the immortals. Recently, uncle-in-law mentioned unrest in the southern lands. I've always thought Princess Jihe as a water god would be sent to battle. I was worried she would be sent to the lands in the south and only allowed back to Zhukongtian after clinching victory. But that was indeed too severe of a punishment. Dancing one dance was much better, was it not? I thought my worries had been for naught, so I smiled in relief at first. Afterwards, I realized how just and benevolent heaven's laws are, which was why I smiled again in veneration. But then I thought that fortunately Princess Jihe can be forgiven due to her talents, but how will a talentless fairy ever make up for her misdeed should she commit one? For this reason, I smiled again in puzzlement. The deities who were present could all hear from her words that this King Kaihu monarch was casting aside their lord's face. She was deliberately refuting his words, yet her remarks had been utterly sincere, utterly modest, and utterly polite. Graciously, Fengju placed her hands together and faced the deities. I come from a rustic land, so I'm not very knowledgeable. How embarrassing I've made myself in front of everyone. She sat back down, and from a distance made the same gesture to Tianjun. Lian Song nudged Dong Hua with his fan and said, "She's quite your peer in spewing bitter words. My father must be having a headache right now." Dong Hua turned the teacup inside his palm and looked toward Fengju's pretense. How can that be? I'm much more succinct than she is. The immortals buzzed with excitement. Most didn't understand what was going on, they were just glad to have something to watch. They only knew one thing, which was that they could now verify the rumors which were flying around before. For example, early this morning Dong Hua had teased someone inside Qingyun Hall. And as it turned out, that person wasn't his foster sister Jihe but rather the famous queen from King Kaihu, Her Highness Fengju. However, there were also some who were clever enough and whispered because they sat far away, "Actually, this is what I think. Why don't you tell me if it sounds right? This is probably a fight for love between the sister and the wife." The sister might harbor secret affections for her brother, and the wife can't stand the little sister. Hence, later, this perceptive fairy, due to his rare ability to logically explain matters, became Siming's assistant in managing the Book of Fate. Siming held him in high regard, his future seemed very bright. Bai Qian only attended this time because her husband Yehua couldn't. Passing 10 miles of peach blossoms, Qian came to visit yesterday. This high deity was single-minded in protecting the Bai siblings. It seemed he had come to lecture Yehua on one thing or another. Because Yehua was occupied with more important things on his hands, his wife had to go in his place. Bai Qian found it troublesome and disliked to socialize. After she saw Tianjun sneaking away after 3 rounds of drinks as always, so did she. She wanted to pull Fengju away as well, but thinking how Fengju shut herself all day long inside Qingyun Palace with the little doe, she only stopped by to give her a reminder to be careful. Her reminder was of no use. Fengju drank openly tonight. She accepted toasts from everyone, and if she liked them, she'd even offer back a cup. They all praised her. As the saying goes, wine reveals character. Everyone agreed she was a chivalrous soul. However, tonight's banquet was a friendly gathering. The drinks were made from fermented fruits. They tasted light, and although they were slow they were quite potent. How could Fengju have known? She thought she was drinking fruit punch, so what was there to worry about? Furthermore, she felt as though her heart was caught in a fire tonight, so she needed to douse that fume using the juice. She drank and drank, finally feeling lightheaded. She couldn't distinguish the past and the present, people and places. She only knew someone was saying something about the party. Then one after another, people came to say goodbye. She started to feel confused, but keeping up with her dignity, she still replied to each of them. In a short while there were no more sounds in the garden. Only the night pearl's light remained cast among the carefree trees, weaving with the shadows in a chaotic clutter. Fengju stared at the drink in her hand. She'd always behaved with moderation when she was drunk, so no one ever really detected her drunken state. Her movements merely became a bit slower, and occasionally if she was too drunk there would be no reaction at all. For instance, her head was feeling empty this time. Who was she? What was she doing here? What was in her cup? She didn't know the answer to any of these questions. She gave the liquid a taste and reckoned it tasted safe. Then suddenly she became thirsty. The wine cup had seemed a bit small, perhaps she should exchange it for a teacup. After some additional thoughts, it was perhaps better to use a teapot altogether. At this moment, out of the blue, she heard a series of steady footsteps. Accompanied by a faint fragrance of white sandalwood, the footsteps stopped in front of her. She lifted her head curiously and saw Donghua, who had returned after having left, slightly bending down to look at her. His gaze paused on her fingers. "What are you still doing here?" Her sluggish brain started to turn at full speed the instant she saw him. She suddenly remembered who he was, and who she was herself. But those memories of 300 years ago were playing tricks on her mind. She couldn't remember anything which happened in the past 300 years. Instead, she felt as though she was back at Taichan Palace this very instant. That handsome face, those deep eyes, and that silver mane belonged to Donghua, and she was the little fox who loved him, who found all sorts of way to stay by his side. She stared at him for half a day and at last raised her cup to show him, drinking juice. Dong Hua lowered his head to her raised hand and took a whiff, then looked up to her. "This is wine." She studied him for a spell again. A puzzled expression appeared on her face. She saw the tower in his hand, which resembled a weapon, and ignored the question of her drink to skip to another question. "Are you having another fight with someone?" She contemplated for a moment, then said, "Then take me with you. I promise I won't give you any trouble." She forgot she was in her human form and thought that she was still a little fox he could conveniently hold in his arms. She gestured with her hand, "I'm so teeny tiny, you can fit me anywhere, can't you?" The flower pin on her hair loosened and fell onto the table. Dong Hua sat down beside her, picked it up, and handed it to her. "You're drunk." She stared intently at the pin for a long time without recognizing it. Her eyes moved away. Then after another eternity she prettily nodded her head and said, "Maybe a little." Then she clutched her head and complained of feeling dizzy. She seemed to truly be dizzy because her body promptly fell over to the side. Dong Hua caught her and helped her up. When he saw her finally sitting straight, he asked, "Can you still find your way back? I'll take you home." "Liar," she studied the cup and switched topics. "You went to teach someone a lesson." She looked out dazedly, then held her head and continued, "What was his name again?" She sounded grievous now. "You told me to wait for you, but you never came back." Then accusingly, "It was still me who went looking for you." Dong Hua was still trying to figure out how to slide the hairpin back in her hair. He tried out different arrangements and skeptically asked her, "When was this?" She lowered her head obediently and let Dong Hua play with her hair. "It was very recent." "Don't move around," he softly told her. She stopped moving and said with conviction, "I'm surely not wrong. I have excellent memory." Foxes have excellent memories. Dong Hua slid the pin into her hair and admired it for a while before saying, "You really are mistaken." "Who am I?" Daijun. She stood up. Her weak round eyes looked at him for a long time, then as if she had remembered something at this very instant, said, "Dong Hua. But you're the worst." He was a little surprised to hear her address him by his name. Then amused, he asked, "Why?" "You said I was only a pet," she answered honestly, eyes misty. "When I left, you didn't stop me." Confused, Dong Hua said, "I don't remember." He hadn't finished when she fell forward into his chest. It turned out she was already too drunk. Dong Hua lowered to look at her. She probably said everything in a drunken stupor. He didn't need to mind any of it. The light emitted from the night pearls cast over her face. He didn't know why she drank so much. She had been prudent up until now. He carried her and flew back to Qingyun Palace. She unconsciously buried her head deep within his embrace. Her long slender fingers gently tugged at the collar of his robe. Her usually icy forehead with the phoenix blossom mark was especially enchanting tonight. Then there was her innocent flushed face. She did not seem like a superior queen at this moment. But there was that one thing. What did she say? He thought and thought. "Yes," she said, "pet." End of chapter 2.